welcome all. And I will ask Norma, our president and founder, to introduce the talkback. Norma, please.
Well, thank you so much and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. I am president of New Plaza Cinema. My name is Norma Levy and we are a nonprofit cinema. Today, our colleague Lori Turchin will be leading a terrific discussion on documentaries based on a special film called Olympic Pride, American Prejudice. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Lori Turchin. Lori?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our talk back today at New Plaza Cinema. We'll be featuring filmmaker Deborah Riley Draper, the executive producer, and director and writer of this film. Obviously a Renaissance woman, to say the least. And let's look at the trailer and then we'll bring her in to talk about it.
First, Williams of America, and here's Louval, very happy to have taken third place.
This is one of the great tragedies of the story you tell, is you have 17, 18 athletes here who were on the world stage. One of them is remembered.
By the time 36 came around, people began to understand who Hitler was and what his goals were.
It was an opportunity on the world stage to disprove white supremacy.
I love my gold medal, but it's not, in history, it's not as important as their gold medals. Like for me, there's just something so special about what they did and who they did it in front of.
These are athletes who did something really important at a seminal point in human history. Not African-American history, not American history, in human history. They did something incredibly important.
Simply being on the medal stand in 1936 sent a message.
From that struggle for legitimacy became the foundation of the struggle for access, which became integrated into nonviolent direct action and primed the pump for Dr. King.
They have stories that have not only drama and drive and power and force, but they're stories that can focus us again on something truly important about the human spirit, about the human race, and what it takes to be truly human and not inhuman.
Well, let's bring in Deborah Riley Draper. Deborah, you could, hey, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I really enjoyed watching this movie again. It's sort of misleading because when you first watch, hear the title, I think you think it's just going to be about Jesse Owens, and it's about everything but Jesse Owens. How did this project come to you?
Well, actually, I discovered doing some research on another individual, Valeda Snow, who was a jazz trumpet player from Tennessee, who actually, during this period leading up to World War II, she was a Black woman and a band leader, and she was in Denmark, and she was actually captured and put into a concentration camp for a temporary period of time. And I did not know that there had been African Americans interned in that way. So as I was researching more about her and the experience she had, I learned through her that she wishes that she had left with those other 18 Black athletes back in 1936. And what 18 Black athletes in 1936.
Right.
So, I was like, there was more athletes who were Black other than Jesse Owens. Yes, there were 16 African-American men and 2 African-American women on the 1936 American Olympic team that headed to Berlin. And I was astonished by the fact that I knew nothing of these other 17 people.
How did you get the voiceover? Because usually it's someone doing an, acting a voiceover, a reenactment, but those were their actual voices. Where did you get that from?
Well, we have Jimmy Laval, we have Archie, we have Jesse Owens in radio interviews from that period of time. So our narrator is the amazing Blair Underwood, who does an incredible job of narrating the story. But we thought it was really important when we found that audio of that radio interview that took place in Berlin and some subsequent interviews to actually use it so that these men could help us tell the story. And it was important because no one knew who Dr. Jimmy Laval was, or who, Tuskegee Airman Archie Williams was, in terms of their participation in the 1936 Olympics. And so to have their actual voices help us was really important.
I think it also led to the credibility of it, rather than, portrayed by. Now, I have to ask you how you got Blair Underwood, because I have crushed on him since LA Law. Did you go to him? Did he come to you? Was it a mutual?
You know what? We emailed Blair Underwood and said, we have this fantastic project. We know that you absolutely are a history buff. We know that your father was in the military in World War II and was an officer. And we asked him, could we send him the trailer to see if this would be a project that he would be interested in? We sent him a more extended trailer than what you saw here. And certainly a trailer. This trailer, for some reason, the music wasn't playing so people can hear the score today. But we sent him this amazing excerpt with the score intact. He saw it, fell in love, and said, I'll be happy to narrate. And if you will allow me, I'll come on, and it's an executive producer. And we're like, well, we allow you. Come on.
Well,
absolutely.
Just so everyone knows, doesn't that mean he's bringing money to the table?
Well, in this instance, he brought other things outside of money as an executive producer. So he brought things we needed to help us get PR, to help us get, as a matter of fact, he was instrumental in the book deal and incredibly instrumental in the PR that we received, as well as being able to launch the film at the 2016 Olympics in Rio.
Wow. How did the idea of the book come about? Because usually, in the movie world, it's always the book comes first and then they make the movie and all the readers of the book are disappointed. You did it the opposite way around. How did the book come about? And is there a book on audio with Blair doing the voiceover?
There's another actor doing the VO, because Blair was on Broadway with the Soldiers play when the audio was being done, for which he was nominated for a Tony. So he was busy. But we did so much research in the 6 years in developing and writing as a writer, obviously writing and producing this film and directing it. There was so much stuff that didn't make the film. Even though this film is 90 minutes and we covered a lot of ground, there was 6 years of research. And Blair was talking, he had been writing mystery novels for a while as a writer, and he had a relationship with Simon & Schuster, and he happened to mention how much research that I'd done, and we had a conversation, and they said, do you think you have enough for a nonfiction book? Absolutely. So obviously, if you have the book or if you've ordered the book, it's 400 pages. So there was a lot of things to cover that certainly couldn't make a film. So having 400 pages to discuss this subject matter, and we begin the storytelling long before these athletes make the Olympic team. We're setting the stage of American imperialism and what's happening with German nationalism in that time at the early 30s, years before. And we see these two paths converge
Well,
at the 1936 Olympics.
we even see the Americans pull the black women from their team. The black women didn't get to compete. It's like, so if I hadn't said this already, I'll say it again. But my favorite line in the movie is the two racist countries competing to see who's the best. I mean, that's really, I was quite taken by how, I thought for sure they'd have segregated living quarters in the Olympic Village, but the Olympic Village seemed like paradise on earth for everyone.
Well, I mean, Jim Crow segregation is a function of America. No one else in the entire world practiced Jim Crow segregation and racism in that way in which it was practiced in America, because Jim Crow was born out of American slavery. So that is that idea of separate but equal, that idea of separatism and Jim Crow segregation is a function of American practices, not German practices. Germany executed their racism in different ways, right? America executes its racism in different ways.
Yeah. I thought it was very interesting when they were calling the race, they didn't refer to the blacks by name. They were like, and the Negro and the Negro, and it like just completely dehumanizes, like you've taken away their name. It's like,
well, and it's interesting, Lori, because what you're listening to is an actual British.
I know, that's what freaked me out, is that it was a Brit.
That's British radio. That's British radio. That's not so when he's calling him all of these names, and he's talking about Archie Williams, who in that moment is a junior at University of California, Berkeley, engineering major. He's also a pilot, and he will become a Tuskegee Airman after graduation and will serve in the Air Force until he retires. He's talking about Archie Williams, and that's a British guy calling the race, and he's, you hear exactly how he's regarding Archie's humanity. And when I say regarding, I mean disregarding Archie's humanity. So
yeah, I got that. That's for sure.
But these are first person, this is, real audio. So this is what people were hearing. So it's really interesting and fascinating. That's why I love documentary film, because it's honest. It's undoctored airplay. This is what people were hearing. So it helps us understand our history of race in our world and how it perpetuates when it comes through mass media, and people are indoctrinated with false ideals and stereotypes as it relates to people and their place in society.
Do we know whatever happened? In the one point in the documentary, it talks about, I think her name was Grundle, that they brought back from Denmark. Greta. Do we ever know what happened to her fate? Like, she end up in a, like what happened to her?
She is absolutely one of the most extraordinary women I have ever met in my entire life. So she's able to escape Germany and she gets to the United States. She's obviously this athlete. And when she gets here, just by the stroke of luck, she meets another German boy who had been an athlete who didn't compete, and they fall in love and they end up being married for 75 years, living in Queens.
Wow. Good old Queens.
Good old Queens. But yeah, they're extraordinary, and they have one child, and he goes on to be a very important guy in the music business. So she lived an extraordinary life.
So let me ask you something. You're one of the few documentarians that I know that sort of traverses across different media. You have feature, this had a feature release, which is very rare for documentary cinema. You've done TV stuff, streaming stuff, just all, you name it. What keeps you going? What's, tell us about some of your other projects.
I mean, I think if you're a writer, and I am, and I'm a member of the Writers Guild, so I am on strike. So if you're a writer, a director, and
unscripted.
Me, I'm always in interviews unscripted, but I have to say that because I am a member of the Writers Guild. So it's important as creators that we get the opportunity to create, and so that we aren't bound to a certain medium or bound to a certain set of rules, that the only thing that we are unbounded in terms of our ability to create and express ourselves. What we should be held to is the standard of excellence, period, across whatever we choose to write, produce, or direct. So that's how I approach it. If there is something that I think is great, I mean, I directed an amazing campaign for the Ad Council a couple of years ago as it related to COVID and vaccines. I'm in the middle of a docuseries right now about James Brown that will air coming soon. And
Now,
I finished.
how did that project come to you? Was that something they came to you, or?
That one came to me, so
Nice.
that was exciting. It's all very different. I think, you know, that you can't actually put yourself in a box. And I think that's what I learned from Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, that you are able to express yourself as in the case of Archie Williams, as a sprinter, as a pilot, as a Tuskegee Airman, as an Air Force veteran, and then he would become a computer science teacher.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating. Absolutely.
Or Ralph Metcalf. Obviously, he won gold medals in 32 and 36, and he would become a US congressman. You just,
Again, I was sort of gobsmacked at how these were Black men already in colleges in the 30s. I mean, that kind of blew me away as well, that they were even, and that America, as racist as it was, even recognized them as human beings allowed to compete in the Olympics. I found that kind of, I mean, as we said, America was, racist in a different way, but just as, racist as Germany,
And Barbara P. noted that they pulled 2 Jewish runners. Absolutely. Sam Stoller and Marty Glickman. That scene is in the film and obviously is talked about in detail in the book.
Yeah, it's just phenomenal to me that these stories are not known, and thank you for bringing them to the light. You want to talk a little more about your James Brown thing that you're working on now?
Well, I can't say but so much, but we're in the middle of post-production and it'll be coming out soon. It'll be a 4-part television series.
Okay.
Doc series.
What are some of the other TV stuff that you've worked on?
I worked on The Legacy of Black Wall Street for OWN and Discovery Plus. It aired 100 years to the day of the massacre of the Tulsa community of Greenwood, which was known as Black Wall Street. So that was a pretty incredible experience to be able to excavate history from 100 years ago. And there were still several people who were still living that had been there during the massacre. And that's such an incredible moment of Oklahoma history where you have this flourishing Black community in 1921 with all of these Black millionaires. There were like 6 or 7, and then they are burned to the ground, murdered. The 40 blocks that was Black Wall Street was abolished by fire and gunfire. So to be able to tell that story with empathy and to be able to understand how that came out of what was Red Summer in this country, and how this community survived and persevered. And now 100 years later, there's this generation of young people. So we were able to talk to this new generation of entrepreneurs that's working to carry on that legacy and create different businesses that are relevant today, but with the same spirit that these incredible residents of Greenwood had back 100 years ago. It's a story of resilience and perseverance, but it's also a story of how very vicious we can be when we don't see ourselves as the same, when we can find all these things to be different about. And if we were to really look at ourselves very closely, we're all the same. We're all people who want the very best for ourselves and our families. And by one family having something, it doesn't take away from another family. It's great for everyone.
Yeah, I believe they did a fictionalized nonfiction of Rosewood, which was a similar story that happened
They
here.
did a fiction version.
Yeah.
John Singleton directed it.
Right.
And very similar. Rosewood and Greenwood were very similar communities in terms of the ambition and the ability to create this lived experience for people of color who were almost just a half a generation away from enslavement.
Yeah. What drives you as a filmmaker? This is not, filmmaking, I think people think it's all glitz and red carpet and paparazzi, and I tell them, yeah, that's like one winchy bit of it. What drives you as a filmmaker? What keeps you going? Because it certainly is something you have to be driven to do, because otherwise it's just too darn hard.
It's very difficult, but it's when you choose to do something you really enjoy, I think you're able to press past the difficulties. I love being able to tell stories. I love being able to tell stories that matter to people. These stories don't have to be loved by everyone. They just have to matter, and they have to be important, and they have to be told well, and they have to make an impact on people. And they hopefully inspire people to learn more or to have tough conversations with friends, family members, neighbors, and colleagues, because that's really what it's about. We really need to have some tough conversations in this country. And sometimes books, movies, poems, songs help us find the right words to express ourselves and to have those tough conversations and to have those necessary conversations. Sometimes we need aid to help us get there. And that's what I like to do with these films, give people something to talk about, and maybe the conversations that they have with their friends and family will unearth things and help them become better people. All of this work helps me become a better person. So I'm hopeful it will help other people too.
Well, let me ask you this, because you started at BBD&O, which is like about as far from down to earth as you can get. But I'm an advertising whore. I admit it. That was my meat. Bread and butter was producing high-end TV commercials for a company like BBD&O. And it seems to me that you broke one of the first rules of filmmaking, making your first film, and that is not to use your own money. So how do you go? Deborah's first documentary that she made is called Versailles 73, which I'll show you the trailer in a minute. I love this film. How do you go from being a vice president at BBDO to financing Versailles 73?
I did it on the nights and weekends. I mean, the reason why I financed my first film, because no one would finance the film for me. I had not been a film. I had zero track record. I had written zero, directed zero, produced zero on the film side. My only experience was advertising. So the only person that would invest in me was me. So I took I took the bet on myself. And that's how that film was made. I was listening to NPR, and that's how I discovered the story. And I found out that, wow, this was another bit of buried history that impacted the fashion world in the most significant manner. 50 years ago, November 28th, 1973, 5 American designers took on 5 French designers at the Chateau de Versailles, and this kind of catwalk battle, if you will, for the crown jewels of fashion. But what really happened was the birth of American ready-to-wear that night. And the women who helped give birth to ready-to-wear were these unknown Black models like Pat Cleveland and Beth Ann Hardison, whose son is actor Kadeem Hardison. So these women were hired because they were cheap, and they were taken to Paris, and they helped these American designers show against the lions of haute couture in the most extraordinary way. And I was like, wow, what a crazy story. And to think you have these Americans that included Liza Minnelli, because she was part of the American entourage that went there to help show clothes. The
Right.
intern was Donna Karen. She worked for Anne Klein. Dennis Christopher, who would go on to play the lawyer of Leonardo DiCaprio in Django, was Halston's assistant. So you have this cast of real characters who are going on to do this fashion show in Paris. You couldn't have made this up. It was so extraordinary. So that became my first film.
Let's show the trailer.
Absolutely crazy to
you
have
guys see it?
5 designers from New York competing with 5 designers from Paris.
And it ended up being a battle, or that's what the press said it was, between the American and the French designers.
It started out very low key. There's a show that's going to happen in Paris and they're looking for models. Some people that were close to you didn't get selected to go. But the main girls got in.
I never would have been there if it wasn't for Billboards. It was a very, very important for everybody because everybody involved was put into the light in the best way, you know.
The French had very elaborate sets. They had very complicated routines. It was electrifying. For all the stiffness of the French thing, the Americans got out there and slammed them with this raw energy.
We moved it a little bit, a lot of it, and in an extraordinary amount, and it just took over everything.
Something happened there at night. And the French were willing to admit it.
American sportswear was something that had to be paid attention to.
There are moments in history that change the course of history. That was a moment in history that changed the course of fashion history.
God, I love that movie. If any of you have never seen it, definitely go watch it because it is amazing. If you're into fashion, I actually worked in the garment center back in the day in the late 70s. So I feel very akin to it and just love it. How was that the springboard for you to go like what happened with that film that kept you going and leaving?
You know what's interesting? I was doing that film and I was showing the rough cut to a friend, and I was like, I'm gonna submit this to the Cannes Film Festival, and she was like, oh no, maybe perhaps you should submit that to the Macon, Georgia Film Festival. And I was like, wow. So I finished the film and I submitted it to the Cannes Film Festival, and I did not get in the Cannes Film Festival, but there was a woman at the festival that introduced me to the Marché du Film that is a part of the Cannes Festival, and it screened there. And at that screening, the Hollywood Reporter was there, Women's Wear Daily was there. So I got all of these positive reviews.
Oh, wow.
Which led to it screening in New York, and the New York Times wrote an amazing review on it as well. And then when it was in the theaters in Los Angeles, the one of the buyers from Viacom who did the Logo channel, she was in charge of Unscripted at Logo. She saw the film just as a fluke. She was just going to the movies, checking out films like she normally does. And so it aired on Logo after RuPaul's Drag Race, and RuPaul did the promotions for the broadcast premiere. And that sort of, between that and the Times Review, kind of catapulted this film into a fashion cult classic. It became a part of several exhibitions in museums, both here and abroad. It became a part of, they screen it like every semester at a lot of the fashion schools in America. We screened it a lot at FIT. So that became kind of this amazing calling card for a first-time filmmaker. It won at festivals a lot. So it was this wonderful opportunity to actually give me confidence and visibility at the exact same time.
Can you speak to the important, it used to be that documentaries were just the milieu of film festivals, you know, like to see a documentary, you had to go to a film festival. You weren't going to see it in the theater. Again, Michael Moore, thank you. Now, of course, we have a gajillion channels we have to fill with programs. So, you know, where'd you go from there?
From there, I went to Olympic Pride, American Prejudice. When I learned that story, I realized that I could make that film. I invested in creating a sizzle for myself, and then I started pitching grants and funds, and I didn't get any of their grants, but I got investors who believed that this would be a great project, and that's how that project came to be.
Talk about that process a little bit, you know, because you know, a lot of films get made, and yes, you get financing, but a lot of them get bought already made at film festivals, much like what happened with Versailles. But can you speak to, you know, getting the financing? Because that's, you know, that's the hardest part of the whole thing, you know.
Well, I begun shooting, and I financed a great bit of it myself. And then I went to a pitch fest that was sponsored by the Southern Documentary Fund in North Carolina. And I pitched the project, and there were investors in the audience. And there was one in particular who loved the story. And we started talking, and she came on board as an EP with money. And basically that helped with all of the finishing funds, the remainders of the interviews, and all of post.
You know, what do you see the difference being as a director between documentary and nonfiction?
You know, you mean between documentary and fiction?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think that the difference is, as a director, you're directing something that's already scripted in narrative. That story is there. As a director on the unscripted, in the documentary space, the story is emerging in front of you. The research is happening throughout the entire process. I mean, you're still doing interviews as you're doing posts, because you may discover some information or get a lead to someone who's still alive in the case of Olympic Pride, American Prejudice. Or you may find a connect in Germany that tells you there's this piece of footage of Louise and Tidy, you know, that you don't have. So these pieces are still coming together throughout the process: development, production, post-production, distribution. You're still gathering information. On the narrative side, the script's done, and you go to read
it. You know what I really like? There's that one picture of the guy who shows a picture of him when he was a kid sitting between the two Italian athletes. It's like, how did that come about?
Well, I had an associate producer that I hired in Berlin, and I asked her to scour all of Germany for anybody who was still alive that was at the 1936 Olympics. And so she found those two people that we interviewed that not only were alive, had pictures to prove that they were there. So
yeah, especially when those two sisters showed the picture with their mother, I got a little choked up there. It was very, very emotional.
That footage, where you actually see Tidy and Louise in the opening ceremonies, her daughters had never seen that until, you know, obviously their mother had passed away.
Right.
So it brought them to tears, and
brought me to tears.
Yeah. And Wolfie's son, Louise Stokes' son, Wolfie, seeing his mother, just, you know, he's seen the film so many times. We've been at screenings, and every single time he starts crying. And this is a man with grandchildren, and he sees that and he cries. And Tidy's daughter, and you see how young and beautiful Tidy is, and she has that camera, and she's on the boat to Germany, and it brings them to tears, because their mother, Tidy and Louise's children, they are the only two Black women in American history to have competed in Nazi Germany.
Wow. But they didn't get to compete, did they?
No. Well, Tidy competed. She broke her foot in the second heat.
Right.
And Louise was benched.
Right. Oh, I was just going to ask you something. What was I going to ask? Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. Speaking of women of color, you worked with our vice president, Kamala Harris.
I did on my documentary film, 20 Pearls, which is the story of the country's first African-American college-age sorority, of which Vice President Harris is a member. So yes, it was a pleasure to work with her. Really interesting. That happened during COVID. So we had COVID protocols, Secret Service protocols. And so we had to work through all of that to create a safe production and still be able to get what we wanted and still be able to get what we needed for the story. So that was quite, it was quite fun talking to her about her 17-year-old self, right?
Were you in that sorority as well?
Oh, of course, that is my sorority as well.
That's great. That's great. I think we should open it up to questions. If anyone has one, please hit the reaction button and raise your hand. Deborah is pretty knowledgeable, obviously, about this topic. Anybody? Nobody?
Well, I have a question. It's
Yes.
Marianne. Attends, I'm going to, Barbara has a question. Let's start with Barbara.
Okay.
And then I'll, Barbara, can you start your video?
I'm sorry, I didn't know you were calling.
Here
us.
you are.
I love your
Hi,
film.
Barbara.
I've already got your other, your Pearls film and your Versailles film on my Prime Video link. So I'm gonna be watching them very shortly. I love documentaries. But I'm wondering, your documentary was released in 2019, is that correct?
Olympic
So
Pride
film
American
2019?
Prejudice was released in 2016.
I'm sorry, 16.
Yes, and
Okay.
Versailles was released in 2012. 20 Pearls was released in 2021.
Well, I'm just wondering if your Olympic documentary had any influence on Ken Burns, because he did that 3-part documentary on America and the Holocaust, or the Holocaust in the US, whatever, which I'm ashamed to say I had not realized how implicitly the United States was involved in not accepting refugees, in basically the State Department putting in quotas, all these things. And I didn't realize how evil Avery Brundage was. And then your documentary preceded that documentary. So I'm just wondering, maybe you had a little influence on a great documentarian there.
Well, I get that statement in question a lot. I don't know if that's the case or not, but what we're able to say is that Olympic Pride, American Prejudice shed a light on Avery Brundage in a way that had not been previously exposed. His connection to the German government, his trips to Nazi Germany, as you saw in the film. So he had this relationship that everyone was aware of, but that no one said anything about. So that's what we wanted to bring to the attention. We also wanted to bring to the attention, like we said in the film, everyone was aware that there was construction going on. So that's what we want. And hopefully, as I said, Barbara, when we make these films, it's great if someone sees something else that needs to be explored further, that inspires someone to have a deeper conversation or to do more research. That's the whole point. And especially in the case of someone as powerful as Avery Brundage, who ends up marrying a German princess, it was important to kind of look at this man in a lot of ways, especially since he benched the women, he benched the Jewish athletes, he did a lot of dirt. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's a wonderful film, and I'm sure I'll enjoy your others just as much. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Barbara, so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Barbara. So my question was, how do you get all this information? Because you say, I ask a young producer here, but how do you get it?
You know what? I actually write an outline of the things that I would like to know if I were watching the film, and things that I have questions about, things that confuse me, things that seem to be like people aren't talking about. And then I dig in concentric circles, just like an investigator. Interestingly enough, I picked up some investigation techniques from my husband, who is an ATF agent. So I really do a lot of the investigation myself, a lot of the research myself. I love going to libraries. I'm an archival producer at heart. I think if you watch Extension, which is on Hulu right now, the story of the slain rapper, young rapper that was killed in South Florida, I'm the archival producer on that film. A friend of mine directed it, but I love being immersed in documents and old footage and old photos. And I love pulling my story out from primary sources. Like, this is what they said, this is what they wrote, this is what's on camera, this is what's in the photo, you know, because when someone snaps a photo and someone's there, the photo, you were present, you know, whether you acknowledge it or not. So even before we start a lot of our interviews, we've done a tremendous amount of research so we know what questions to ask. Because, you know, when I went to Germany for Olympic Pride, I went to Berlin and Cologne, and I did interviews in both cities, but I had done 1.5 years of research before I went to Germany. So once I had these folks, I could ask the hard, tough questions and really get there. So I think that's really important, becoming knowledgeable and a historian on the topics that you're talking about, so that you know who's telling you the truth, who's lying, what you should use, what you shouldn't, because you have to make a lot of real decisions as a filmmaker, because you want to be right and accurate, and you want to tell the right stories, and you want to make sure that you do more good than harm. And so you have to have put in the work as a researcher and put in the work as an investigator. I never in a million years thought I would unearth that Avery Brundage had a contract with the State Department to help build the embassy, the German embassy in DC. Obviously, he had a construction company, and that construction company was going to build the embassy in Germany. That is just too close for comfort when you're responsible for the Olympic team. That's double dipping. So I didn't know I was going to find that out, but in the research in his papers at the university where Avery Brundage donated all of his papers, there's several documents buried in some files, and I was like, oh my God, you know? And also the conversations he had about Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, those two Jewish sprinters. They brought them over for PR, but he was never going to put them on the track.
Do you kind of feel like the Indiana Jones of filmmaking?
Well, you know, I think all of our history is censored in so many ways that people want us to have a certain version, and it's up to all of us to really dig and ensure that the information that we're getting, that we're being fed, is true. So I have a responsibility and an accountability, particularly as an African-American filmmaker. It's important to me to ensure that the stories that I'm telling are authentic, but accurate and true. And so that people can have a better understanding of the journey of my ancestors and the people before me, and the people they interacted with. All people of all races, right, in this country, it have impacted the way all of us are in this country. So the telling of our story has to be open and available to everyone so everyone can hear it. So to be able to play that role is an honor, and it's a privilege, because part of it is filmmaking, part of it is teaching, part of it is inspiration, and a whole hell of a lot of it is fact finding.
Well, this is why you and I bond so much, because in case anyone watching doesn't know, I'm a film history teacher, and I just love, and I'm fascinated with that period of history.
Me too. Because so much of what is right now in 2023 is born out of that particular period of American history. Like, so much of what happened in the FDR administration, is what we are responding to in 2023. Like, it's all connected.
How much did the Black Lives Matter movement have to do with making this film? Because it happened about 2 years after.
I don't, there's no connection that I'm aware of. Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, there's no
It's
connection.
just, here's the thing. It's just a timeless piece, because man's inhumanity to man has always been obvious. and to humanize it, to show us, these are actual people, not just Negroes. I hated every time he said that, and the Negro, and he's wild and he's going crazy. And it's like, stop calling, he has a name,
Well, it's a really important thing, right? Because how we put, place, and characterize people in mass media lives well beyond the moment when that person says it. So if you say he runs like a beast and he's savage on the track, beast and savage becomes the things that people remember about that particular individual, and by proxy, that individual's community, right? So you're creating this story world around a person that's not even true.
Yeah.
You're typecasting and you're stereotyping, and you're creating these illusions of someone, as opposed to saying who the person is and what they're about, and getting to know them on an individual basis, right?
Yeah.
So if I were running in 1936 and I actually ran track and I was very quick, they would have said that I was a beast on the track.
Right.
They would have called me a Negro. They would have called me all the same names that they called Archie Williams and the other 18 people. But I'm not those names.
We
And I don't
make headway, but it still bothers me that your film has so much relevance in the
It
modern.
should bother you. That's the point, Lori. You should be bothered.
I think good documentaries, what they do, and even fiction films or nonfiction. I always forget which is which. I'm sorry. I'm like dyslexic that way.
But you're supposed to think, right? Whether it's narrative or documentary, you're supposed to think.
It's like, you don't want, the old Hollywood cinema, kind of fed you and reeled you in and tied it up in a bow. And, I think, especially working at the Global Peace Film Festival, one of the things I find really inspiring is that so many of the filmmakers weren't filmmakers at all, that they found their way to telling, the best way to get their message out was through cinema. And worked strictly from passion.
Well, some of the greatest advocacy has come through art.
Absolutely.
So, think about some of the songs of the civil rights movement. Think of some of the greatest, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud from James Brown, some of the Bob Dylan songs.
I was watching the series 1971, and they were talking about Marvin Gaye's music, which is
Marvin Gaye in particular. So these songs reflect what people are seeing, right? They reflect the way society is interacting with itself, and they're putting this to music to express their concern or their distress, or to call things out that need to be called out. And there's no other way to call it out sometimes, other than through a painting or through a poem, or even through graffiti in some ways,
Right. Yeah. People just don't seem to understand the impact of there's a reason the expression, a picture says 1,000 words, exists.
It does. It does say 1,000 words, because you can get it. And the thing that I like about film and documentary in particular is that I hope, because this happens to me, you can watch Olympic Pride, American Prejudice 50 times, and you're going to see something different that you didn't catch the first time. You're going to get another lesson. Something else is going to stick with you. You're going to learn about another character. You're going to learn about, you're going to read, one of those graphic animations of the news a little bit closer. You're going to listen a little bit more intensely. And I think that's why sometimes we watch things over and over again. We have something that we love and we watch it because it continues to impact us more significantly every single time.
As a film
I
history.
think it is an incredible conclusion.
Oh, okay.
I think it's amazing, because you're right. You are challenging sometimes what we know, what we think, and we discover. And I think, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Deborah.
so
It's a
much.
pleasure talking to you. And hope to see everyone this coming Wednesday when we redo the documentary lecture. So hope to see you all there on Wednesday. And
Oh,
Deborah's
attends, Barbara is, again, Barbara, do you want to say something?
No, I was just applauding. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, so
That was
voilà, Barbara
cool.
is
Thank you.
applauding. I think
Sorry.
here.
Thank you.
here
I
we
hope you
applaud.
all enjoyed getting to know more about the creative process of a filmmaker and what kind of gumption it takes to make your vision happen, whether it be true or a narrative. So
Thank you guys so much. It was an honor and a
you.
pleasure. Have a great
It's an honor
Sunday.
for us. Thank you so much, Deborah.
ciao, ciao, Deborah.